Okay, hello, 7th grade ELA. Today's going to be our second Ed puzzle lesson over Animal Farm. Before we get started, go ahead and I'm going to put 3 minutes on the timer for your activator. If you do not know the answers to these questions, I just want you to try. 3 minutes is going on the timer. Flip each question, complete sentences please, and begin. And that is time. So as I go over the answers to our activator questions, if you realize that you didn't get something, please go ahead and fix it. And if you more or less got it, go ahead and put a check mark. Who were Napoleon and Snowball? The answer to this question was that they were two of the pigs on the farm who were in charge of leading the rebellion. If you remember, after Old Major died, he passed away. Napoleon and Snowball both sort of took the lead in leading the revolution. Napoleon was meant to represent Joseph Stalin, and we talked about that yesterday, how his character is sort of meant to represent Stalin, so that's important for you to know. Number 2 said, what are the animals planning on doing in this chapter? Well, based on our reading yesterday, we talked about how they were planning on starting a revolution or a rebellion in order to take back the farm from Mr. Jones and to make life better for all of the animals. That was the plan. So you had something similar to that for number 2. Please go ahead and add it in. Finally, number 3, do you think the animals will be successful in overthrowing Mr. Jones? This was simply a your personal opinion question, but I was looking for you to have 2 to 3 complete sentences. So whether you argued, yes, I do think that they're going to be successful, or no, I do not, please make sure that you explained. That's what I'm looking for in order for you to be able to get your 100 on your activator. If you need to pause the video at this time to go back and fix your activator, feel free to do so now. But I'm going to go ahead and move ahead so we can figure out what we're going to be doing in today's lesson. Today's objective says I can make inferences, circle inferences, about characters based on their words and actions in Chapter 2 of Animal Farm by answering TDQs. So of course we've been talking about making inferences all year long. You use what the text tells you, you use what you already know to make your inference, but we're going to be looking specifically at the words that the characters say today and also the actions that they're going to say. And in your independent practice today, you're going to have to write 2 ACE paragraphs where you analyze what we infer about these characters based on either their words or actions. This is going to help us to better understand the characters and also help us better understand what this book is really about. Go ahead and take a look down at your guided notes. Take 30 seconds to look over your guided notes. This is actually a review. Take 30 seconds and see if you can fill in any blanks by yourself before we go over it. Go. Let's go ahead and talk about a few of these. There are a couple of key terms in here that you need to know before tomorrow's quiz, and I'll talk more about the quiz in a second here. Bullet point number 1, the author George Orwell, please make sure you know his name. He's an important American author. The author George Orwell wrote the book to be an allegory, A-L-L-E-G-O-R-Y. This is an important, put a star next to it, an important literary term that you need to know, not just in general as an English student, but also for math is going to be important. You're going to see that word come up. So in an allegory, every major character represents a person from the Russian Revolution. So we talked about how Napoleon represents Stalin, we talked about how Old Major represents Lenin, and we talked about how the other animals on the farm represent the peasants. And of course, Mr. Jones, he represents the Tsar of Russia who gets overthrown. Again, you need to know what an allegory is. Number 2, Orwell's main target was Joseph. You better have gotten this one right because we have talked so much about Joseph Stalin. And his main message is about how people can abuse or misuse power. Circle the word power. This book is mainly about power. We saw that Mr. Jones had all the power and the animals took him over. We're then going to see what happens when the animals who are in charge, what they do with the power that's given to them. Think back to when we talked about Joseph Stalin and when he came to power. Was he fair to the peasants? All right, bullet point number 3. We know Joseph Stalin used power in many dangerous and violent ways. Think about how this is what we were just saying, think about how the characters or animals in Animal Farm use their power. So again, our essential question throughout this book is, how do people use power? Do people use power in mainly good ways, in mainly negative ways? That's what we're talking about. That's the big idea as we work through the book. Before we get into our lesson, I want to remind you that not only is your homework packet due tomorrow, so please make sure that you are working on that tonight to turn that in tomorrow, but also you're going to have a quiz tomorrow over Chapter 1 and 2. If you have missed a couple days this week or you have not been here, Monday and Tuesday we read Part 1 and Part 2 of Chapter 1. Yesterday and today we're reading Part 1, Part 2 of Chapter 2. So if you've been here, you should be good for this quiz. If you have missed a day, you need to be holding up a silent 3 or let me know by the end of class so that I can help you give you some of the reading so you can get caught up. At this time, go ahead and flip to the next page because we're going to get into our lesson. There's going to be 2 portions of reading today. The first portion of our reading is going to be, you're going to hear me reading, and I'm going to model answering one of our TDQs as we go. You'll notice that for each of our TDQs today, I'm asking you to flip the question. Please make sure you are not leaving any of these TDQs blank. When I collect up your packets and I take them home and I grade them, if there are a lot of blanks on here, it does affect your 100-point classwork grade. So please, please, please make sure you're flipping the question and that you're annotating. That's why you have your own copy of the packet. Good readers always annotate. So if I'm the reader and I'm going to start reading and I've got these TDQs that my teacher gave me, I'm actually going to read the question first before I start reading so I know what to look for. So the first question says, what did Mr. Jones started doing in life? All right, so I know that I'm going to be looking for something about Mr. Jones and something that he started doing. So as I'm reading, I'm looking for the answer to TDQ number 1. Go ahead and take out your copy of the text and come down to where it says start. We're going to pick up on page 18. Again, any markings for this first TDQ or in general that I make on here or that you want to add, please make sure you are marking up that text like a good ELA student. All right, here we go. Second part of chapter 2 of Animal Farm. Now, as it turned out, the rebellion was achieved much earlier and more easily than anyone had expected. In past years, Mr. Jones, here we go, although a hard master, had been a capable farmer. But of late, he had fallen on evil days. He had become much disheartened. Circle that word, disheartened. That means like discouraged. Discouraged. After losing money in a lawsuit, and had taken to drinking more than was good for him. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen, reading the newspapers, drinking, and occasionally feeding Moses on crusts of bread soaked in beer. So I already see a possible answer to our first TDQ number 1. So I'm going to show, I see that he lost money in a lawsuit, and he had taken drinking more than it was good for him. So I'm going to underline that. And I'm going to say TDQ number 1, so Mr. Wilson knows that's where I found my answer. Also, if I need to come back to it later, I should be good. So at this time, if you need to pause to get your answer, that's totally fine. So I'm going to come back up here, and I'm going to flip the question. I'm going to say, Mr. Jones, slide over, had started drinking more because he lost money in a lawsuit. Again, I didn't just copy over the exact wording from the text. I actually put it in my own words. Mr. Jones started drinking more because he lost money in a lawsuit. TDQ number 1. So I basically did that one for you. The rest I am not going to do for you. So the next thing I would do if I were you, I would look at number 2. It says, why did Mr. Jones not feed the animals when he got home? Flip the question, annotate. So again, I'm looking for when Mr. Jones decides he is not going to feed the animals. Going forward, as I continue to read, when you see the answer to a text, dependent question, you need to pause the video and you need to actually come back to the question and answer it. Do not just listen to the whole read through all the way through. I think it's easier to actually stop along the way. As long as you get the questions answered, we're totally fine. So I'm going to come back here to my text, follow along, pausing as you need to. Make sure that you are following along on your own copy as we read. I'm going to pick up at the bottom of 18. His men were idle and dishonest. Idle means they were doing nothing. His men, so the men who work on his farm, were idle and dishonest. The fields were full of weeds. The buildings wanted roofing. The hedges were neglected. And the animals were underfed. I think we're going to get to TDQ number 2 here. June came, and the hay was almost ready for cutting. On Midsummer's Eve, which was a Saturday, Mr. Jones went into Willington and got so drunk at the Red Lion that he did not come back till midday on Sunday. The men had milked the cows in the early morning and then had gone out rabbiting, without bothering to feed the animals. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to sleep on the drawing room sofa with the news of the world over his face, so that, when evening came, the animals were still unfed. Hint, hint, TDQ number 2. At last they could stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with whips in their hands, lashing out in all directions. This was more than the hungry animals could bear. With one accord, though nothing of the kind had been planned beforehand, they flung themselves upon the tormentors being the men who are whipping them. Jones and his men suddenly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of control. They had never seen animals behave like this before, and this sudden uprising of creatures whom they were used, flip the page, who they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they chose, frightened them out of their wits. After only a moment or two, they gave up trying to defend themselves and took to their heels. A minute later, all 5 of them were in full flight down the cart track that led to the main road, with the animals pursuing them in triumph. Mrs. Jones looked out of the bedroom window, saw what was happening, hurriedly flung a few possessions into a carpet bag, and slipped out of the farm by another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones and his men out to the road and slammed the 5-barred gate behind them. And so, almost before they knew what was happening, the rebellion had been successfully carried through. Jones was expelled, and the manor farm was theirs. I want to remind you, if you need to pause now to answer some of your TDQs, please do so. For the first few minutes, the animals could hardly believe in their good fortune. Their act was to gallop in a body right round the boundaries of the farm, as though to make quite sure that no human being was hiding anywhere upon it. Then they raced back to the farm buildings to wipe out the last traces of Jones's hated reign. The harness room at the end of the stables was broken open. The bits, it's like what you put in a horse's mouth to control where they go, the nose rings, the dog chains, the cruel knives with which Mr. Jones had been used to castrate the pigs and lambs were all flung down the well. The reins, the halters, the blinkers, the degrading nose bags were thrown onto the rubbish fire which was burning in the yard. So were the whips. All the animals capered with joy when they saw the whips going up in flames. Snowball also threw onto the fire the ribbons with which the horses' manes and tails had usually been decorated on market days. Ribbons, he said, should be considered as clothes, which are the mark of a human being. All animals should go naked. When Boxer heard this, he fetched the small straw hat which he wore in summer to keep the flies out of his ears and flung it to the fire with the rest. So again, notice that they're throwing away everything that reminds them of when they were enslaved. In a very little while, the animals had destroyed everything that reminded them of Mr. Jones. Napoleon then led them back to the store shed and served out a double ration of corn to everyone, and 2 biscuits for each dog. Then they sang Beasts of England from end to end 7 times running, and after that they settled down for the night and slept as they had never slept before. But they woke at dawn as usual, and suddenly remembering the glorious thing that had happened, they all raced into the pasture together. A little way down the pasture there was a knoll that commanded a view of most of the farm. Circle knoll. Knoll is just like a hill. So they go up to a hill to sort of look over the whole farm. The animals rushed to the top of it and gazed around them in the clear morning light. Again, I want to remind you, if you need to pause now to answer any of your TDQs and annotate, now is a good time to be doing that. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. In the ecstasy of that thought, they gamboled around and round. They hurled themselves into the air in great leaps of excitement. They rolled in the dew. They cropped mouthfuls of the sweet summer grass. They kicked up clods of the black earth and snuffed its rich scent. Then they made a tour of inspection of the whole farms and surveyed with speechless admiration of the plowland, the hayfield, the orchard, the pool, spinning. It was as though they had never seen these things before. And even now, they could hardly believe that it was all their own. We're going to do a quick stop and jot, and I want you to copy down the following. So far in the chapter, so you're stopping here. So far in the chapter, and I want you to fill that in. Take 1 minute. What has happened so far in the chapter, and what has been going on? This is my check for understanding, my CFU, to make sure you've actually been reading. 1 minute on my timer. Fill in that sentence stem. So far in the chapter, fill it in across. What's been happening? All right, so you could have said anything like, so far in the chapter, the animals successfully pulled off their rebellion and kicked Jones off the farm. So far in the chapter, the animals kicked Jones out and they're now celebrating. Anything like that would have worked for that part right there. Again, I'm going to continue to read. Make sure you're annotating and answering your TDQs. Then they, the animals, filed back to the farm buildings and halted in silence outside the door of the farmhouse. That was theirs too. But they were frightened to go inside. After a moment, however, Snowball and Napoleon butted the door open with their shoulders, and the animals entered in a single file, walking with the utmost care for fear of disturbing anything. Put a star there. That line's going to be important when we come to our independent practice. They tiptoed from room to room. Notice how they're moving. Afraid to speak above a whisper and gazing with a kind of awe at the unbelievable luxury, at the beds with their feather mattresses, the looking glasses, the horsehair sofa, the Brussels carpet, the lithograph of Queen Victoria, it's like a painting, over the drawing room mantelpiece. So again, they're just looking at all the things in the farmhouse. Think about where the Tsar of Russia lived in a big palace and when it was taken over. They were just coming down the stairs when Molly was discovered to be missing, one of the animals. Going back, the others found that she had remained behind in the best bedroom. She had taken a piece of blue ribbon from Mrs. Jones's dressing table, and was holding it against her shoulder and admiring herself in the glass in a very foolish manner. The others reproached her sharply. Circle that word reproach. That means like scolded her. Because remember, they're not supposed to be putting on any ribbons. And they went outside. Some hams, or pigs, hanging in the kitchen, were taken out for burial. So some of the hams that were, some of the pigs that were killed that Mr. Jones was going to eat, they took them out to bury them. And the barrel of beer in the scullery, or in the basement, was stove in a kick from Boxer's hoof. Otherwise, nothing in the house was touched. A unanimous, that means like united, resolution was passed on the spot. Circle resolution means like a decision. Was passed on the spot that the farmhouse should be preserved as a museum. All were agreed that no animal must ever live there. The animals had their breakfast, and then Snowball and Napoleon called them together again. Comrades, circle that word comrades, that just means friends. Again, a common word that would have been used by someone like Joseph Stalin. It is 6:30, and we have a long day before us. Today we begin the hay harvest, but there is another matter that must be attended to first. The pigs now revealed that during the past 3 months they had taught themselves to read and write from an old spelling book which had belonged to Mr. Jones's children and which had been thrown on the rubbish heap. Napoleon sent for pots of black and white paint and led the way down to the 5-barred gate that gave on to the main road. Then Snowball, for it was Snowball who was best at writing, took a brush between, flip to the next page, he took a brush between the 2 knuckles of his trotter, painted out Manor Farm from the top bar of the gate, and in its place painted Animal Farm. This was to be the name of the farm from now onwards. And we're going to go ahead and stop right there. Your exit ticket is going to pick up right here where it says, after this, they went back to the farm. That to the end will be your exit ticket reading that you'll come back to at the end. If you need to stop the video at this time, to make sure that you have all of your TDQs answered, please do so. I will be checking to make sure all of those are answered, that you flipped the question, and that you've annotated. So again, if you need to pause at this time to make sure that you've answered each of those, feel free to do so now. If you are ready to move on, we're going to go ahead and move to the independent practice part of our lesson today. Again, our key question today is, what are the different points of view of different animal farms after the rebellion in Animal Farm? And our goal today is that we're going to be able to, like we said in our objective, our goal today is that we're going to be able to make inferences. We're going to use what the text already taught us, and then what we already know about what's going on in the book to make an inference, cite evidence, and explain. So let's go ahead and I'll get us started on number 1. Because we've done this so much before, I'm not going to do a full one here. I will help you get started. The rest of the independent practice will be up to you to make sure you have what you need. So you have 2 quotes here. On each quote, you are meant to read it first. So I'm going to come to quote number 1. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. Circle theirs. Always, whenever you see a pronoun, who does they refer to? The animals. So remember, like we read, this is when the rebellion has been successful, and they're walking around the farmhouse, and they're seeing all the things around the land that are now theirs. Everything that they could see was theirs. In the joy of that thought, they gambled round and round. Circle that word, gambled. I might not know what gambled means, but it sounds like they're sort of like celebrating, and they're dancing or running in like a joyful way, round and round. They hurled themselves into the air in a great leaps of excitement. So again, your task for the independent practice today is to write me 2 ACE paragraphs that's telling me what you can infer about the animals based on their actions here. So I'm going to come over here to my text-dependent question. My key question. What inference can you make about the animals based on their actions? Answer in an ACE paragraph. Circle that word inference and circle that word actions. That's going to be important as you come to write your ACE paragraph. I want to remind you, for your ACE paragraph, please make these annotations. You need to have 3 sentences. I know you guys have you've practiced these ACE paragraphs in Miss Lester's room. We've done them a lot, especially if you've been doing the homework packets. So that's what I'm going to be looking for today. An ACE paragraph helps you organize your response and helps you really to cite evidence and explain your claim. So I'm going to help you get started based on just, I'm going to help you get started with your sentence stems, but you're actually going to go ahead and do the rest of it yourself. So I want you to remember the 3 ways that we start an ACE paragraph. So A, you first need to answer the question. So just flip the question. Based on what I read, or according to the text, based on what I read, I can, what is it asking about? I can infer that the animals blank. When you go to finish this, you need to be thinking about what can you infer about the animal's point of view? What can you infer about their emotions and their feelings? What can you infer about their perspective based on this text? You're going to be filling that one in. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to model each of these sentence stems, and then you are going to finish it. So stay with me for the next 30 seconds as I remind you each of these sentence stems, and then you are actually going to finish it. So we start off, we said, based on what I read, I confer that the animals, and then you're going to go ahead and fill that in. When you come down to cite evidence, so I'm going to skip down a couple lines so I leave myself enough room. And again, if you say, Mr. Wilson, I already know how to do an ACE paragraph, I'm good, you just go ahead and start filling it in. This is for the folks who might need a little bit of review. So this was our A, we answered the question. C, in the text, comma, it states You need to cite me evidence from here. Pull out the most important sentence or piece of the sentences. And then finally, you're going to come down here for your E. This quote supports my inference. My inference. Always connect your explanation back up to what you were talking about up here. This quote supports my inference because ACE. So I'm going to set my timer. You're going to have 8 minutes to work through number 1. Once you finish it, you're going to have 8 minutes to come down here and do the same thing again for number 2. Notice again, you must have an ACE paragraph 3 sentences. So again, putting about 8 minutes on my timer, 7 to 8 minutes. Work through number 1, work through number 2, your 2 ACE paragraphs, and begin. This time, about half of your time is done for your independent practice. You should be moving to quote 2 to finish up that ACE response if you have not done so already. If you finish early, you can check over your work and begin to move to the exit ticket. Okay, and at this time, you should be finished with with your TDQs. You should be finished with your independent practice. I'm now going to set the timer for 10 minutes. Go ahead and move to your exit ticket. For your extended exit ticket today, you need to read the last part of Chapter 2 that will be on the quiz tomorrow, and you need to answer the questions on your exit ticket. 10 minutes on the timer begins now. So I'm going to stop the timer a little bit early. If you are not yet finished, use this next 5 minutes to finish up your packet, check over all your work, and then take out a dear book.